Welcome to your in-depth weekly astrology overview and zodiac forecast for week commencing the 16th of June. I'm going to share some standout details to look out for to begin with. Then on screen, the event chart right at the top of the week, which always provides an influential backdrop for the whole 7 days. I'll then go through each of the influences, which includes the summer solstice, frame by frame, to give a clear picture of what we can collectively expect. I'll then go through all of the 12 zodiac signs from Aries through to Pisces, which you can relate to in terms of your ascendant, sun or the moon. I'm astrologer Patrick Arundell. A very warm welcome. Thank you so much for joining me. If you've yet to subscribe to the channel, please help it thrive and do so now, but also click the bell notification symbol. If you would like to have a one-to-one with me, it would be a great pleasure. Please see my testimonials below. I'm always greatly touched by what people say. If you would like to take advantage of my unique special offer, you can order your year 2026 forecast now, get the rest of this year free, but also get 30% off and also your life roadmap report. A hugely important document. This helps to give us searing insights to the patterns that have played out in our lives so far, but work much more intimately with that energy in a way future forwards together with our forecast that can see us time our moves more accurately. Please see the link below for more. If you have become a member of the channel, thank you so much. If you'd like to consider it, I have set the entry level at, I feel, a very affordable rate. Thank you to my Patreons. If you've yet to visit my new website, please check it out at patrickarundell.com. There are loads of celestial goodies to enjoy, not least your daily, weekly, monthly, yearly, general, love and Vedic horoscopes, and also my absolutely sensational 3-card tarot. Please see below for more on that. This week begins with us emerging from perhaps one of the most powerful weekends that I can recall for some while. We had a coalition between two synodic cycle or secular events. Mars, of course, squaring up with Uranus. If we think back to when Uranus first moved into the sign of Taurus for 5 months in May 2018, guess what? Mars and Uranus were in a square. But Mars at that time was on the anaretic degree in Capricorn, but went into Aquarius in a retrograde and clashed all through that summer with Uranus. So that set the tone. That was the seed-in chart, and ever since then we've had a huge amount of turbulence, particularly around finances, the cost of food, the cost of fuel and so forth. So that reached a peak at the end of last week, but they're still in contact as we go into this week, as is the other very influential square, the third in a year, between Jupiter and Saturn, which is repeated every 10 years. But this time, for the first time, it was with them both in new homes. So that sets the tone at the start of the week. We could be feeling on edge. But then Mars relocates. In total, it spent 17 weeks since the 6th of November in the very proud sign of Leo. But it moves into the practical sign of Virgo, so I need to share all about that with you too. Now, at the heart of this week, we have a complex quarter moon, which could be tricky. That's something I need to unpack as well. But Mars does go on to forge a very successful link with Jupiter, but Jupiter's in quite the clash with Neptune. So we need to understand that, because that can create the potential for unreality. Now, as we go into the weekend, the Sun returns to the sign of Cancer. We have the summer solstice, but this ushers in cardinal quadrant 2, the backdrop energy for the next 13 weeks. I know the Sun in Cancer is very much about nurture, protection and security, and it does meet with Jupiter at the end of the week, one of astrology's nominally most fortunate alliances, but they're both in a jarring clash with the restrictive energies of Saturn. So it's going to continue to be quite the week. Stay with me as I go through this for you. On the screen now, I'm showing the event chart. As ever, we need to be mindful of the two luminaries. Now, the Sun in the sign of Gemini is now in cardinal quadrant 3. So, of course, it's coming to the end of its journey in this sign. But you can see it's actually in a very healing angle with the position of Chiron through the first few days. If there is something we need to think about, talk about, or consult about, in terms of our sense of identity, we could have a very important chat or learn something that's very nurturing. But you can see also the moon is in the air sign of Aquarius. But later on in the day on Monday, it will move into the final zodiac sign, the sign of culmination, Pisces. The moon can be complex in Pisces, but perhaps after all this abrasive energy at the start of the week, it does give us an opportunity in some ways to just try to digest and release and perhaps reflect on the turbulence that's played out, because I feel it will be very intense still at the very start of this week. But then I mentioned that the Mars makes its way into the sign of Virgo. It's going to be there through to the 6th of August. What's really important about this is ever since Mars moved into Cancer at the start of September last year, the 4th, it's been going through the sign of Cancer and Leo and then repeat. So moving into the sign of Virgo, we're breaking out of that retrograde season which occurs every 2.5 years. Mars in Virgo is often an aspect in people's natal charts who do very precise work. It could be a surgeon, it could be someone who's very good at crafts, very precise, can really concentrate, but use their energy in a very helpful way. Also, Mars in Virgo is good for us to think about our physical vitality. Are we being quite as virtuous as we could be? Because having Mars in the hedonistic Leo, or the combination can be hedonistic, perhaps there have been times during its 17-week total journey in 2 sections that we have maybe burnt the candle at both ends. So if there is a need to take care of ourselves a bit more, there can be the impulse to do that. However, we need to be mindful that Mars is in an immediate quincunx with both Saturn and Neptune. And why this is really important is Saturn and Neptune in Aries, although we are seeing a more assertive posture, certainly around the world in certain governmental cycles, we're also seeing in some ways a more ruthless approach to people who are vulnerable. Neptune in Pisces, now in Aries. And because the sign of Virgo can be not so much to do with health, but to do with trying to do things the right way, I feel that one of the combinational energies of Saturn conjunct Neptune through to the end of August, when Saturn inverts back into Pisces on the 1st of September, is that collectively our physical vitality may be a little low. So if we think with Mars going into Virgo, that we can really get back into doing exercise, making sure that we're putting a little bit more effort into those areas. That's good, but I don't think we should overdo it. One of the great things about Mars in Virgo, however, it can be more focused, less on individual ego and more on doing things for the service of others. And I think that is very positive. And also Mars does forge a very energized link to Jupiter, as I mentioned before. And that's a lovely link because we know that Jupiter in Cancer is exalted, so he could shine there. It's just Saturn and Neptune are preventing that. And what will happen with Jupiter and Neptune squaring up on Thursday is that there may be something that takes on something of an energy of unreality, and that could be triggered by the quarter moon on Wednesday, which is in the sign of Pisces. So the Gemini energy of the Sun squares off with the Pisces moon, and the potential for slander and gossip is very strong in the following week. So again, very important to try to protect ourselves. So Mars in its link to Jupiter suggests that we focus on the emotional strategies and maybe closing out a little bit of our exposure to media and social interaction through technology. So we just cocoon ourselves a little bit away and focus on what's really important for us. So practicality. So in a way, Mars in Virgo, although it would usually be amplified in its energy by Jupiter, is clashing with Saturn and Neptune. So I think the best thing we can do is prioritize, and where possible, if we are connecting or we have to connect with people who tend to be quite draining, that quarter moon, just make sure that we don't share or give anyone any juicy tidbit to seize on, which could suddenly be, you know the story, by the time it reaches the next person, it's much more altered, it's much altered in the retelling in not a positive way. But as we get to Saturday, we do have the summer solstice, the second of the quadrant phases in the Western tropical calendar. So it's a backdrop energy for the next 13 weeks, but obviously the first 4 of those is exclusively about Cancer. So the sun coming to this point in the northern hemisphere is of course the longest day, the shortest day in the south. But what we do have is the sun aligning with Jupiter. And again, if we can be mindful on the strategies that are very protective, whether it's to do with our physical and organisational well-being, Mars, or it is to do with just spending time with people who are good for us, good for our souls, getting in touch with what really works for us. But if you are somebody who is very focused on thrusting forwards in a very dynamic way, that Aries energy, you do need to stay in touch with how things feel over the following month, but also 13 weeks. Please stay with me as I go through each of the 12 zodiac signs from Aries through to Pisces. So Aries, your ruler Mars, makes the switch on Tuesday into a new home this week, which obviously is a big deal for you because Mars energy is what you're about. It's about action, assertion, can create a degree of excitement, but you may have had an overload of excitement at the end of last week and perhaps into the start of this week. How did it play out for you? You may have felt a little bit impulsive, perhaps around something that attracted you in terms of an investment or a speculative situation, or has it been someone in a more romantic sphere who's been making your pulse race? And of course Venus, the planet of relating but also of money, is in a very sultry part of your chart as you come into this week. So if there is someone that you're finding very, very alluring, Mars moving into the 6th house could give you the push to be a bit more conscious of how you might actually connect to that person in a thoughtful way. So good deeds could definitely come back to you for sure. But in terms of the bigger picture, this week's quarter moon is a little bit tricky at the heart of the week, because there may be something in the back of your situation that you're not consciously aware of, and it may be that someone around you is not quite as reliable or trustworthy as you would like. And what can seem like quite an innocent conversation might actually mask or hide the fact that this person could be a bit of a schemer, not very noble in their approach. So do keep your guard up a little bit. I wouldn't be too free and easy with personal information, particularly with someone you've never really trusted or don't know very well. Now, I know that sounds quite an obvious thing to say, but what can happen with Gemini energy, with the sun coming to the end of its journey there, is we can just let things slip in a very quick way. So just be conscious of that. Now, of course, at the end of last week, Saturn and Jupiter, Saturn in your sign along with Neptune, was clashing. There may be something around your emotional world that does seem a little bit frustrating. With the sun moving to join up with Jupiter towards the end of this week, you can start to address this. But one of the things I would say, especially if you're thinking of redecorating, moving home, wanting to add to your family, things might not go quite as rapidly as you would like. But one of the great things about Mars in Virgo is it can make us a bit more realistic. It's been going through the sign of Leo a lot, and particularly again since the 18th of April. And for you, that has been an opportunity to have fun or to demonstrate your creativity. And whatever it is that you have been spending time upon, whether it is a relationship, it is an interest, it is something that you have a talent for, what Mars in Virgo is asking you to do is meld to the talent and the flair, the hard work and application to really take that forwards. But because Saturn and Neptune are parked up on your lawn, if you like, the energy that you're going to have available isn't necessarily going to be quite as much as you would normally like. So be very circumspect about what your priorities are. As this week draws to a close, maybe it would be a good time to get together with loved ones, people you care for. But if there have been some politics or tensions that came to the surface as last week came to a close, I don't think as this week comes to an end with the sun moving into Cancer and the summer solstice, it's necessarily going to be a panacea. You may even feel a bit at odds with yourself, not quite sure of how to approach something, or feel a bit more vulnerable than usually would be the case. But I think retreating into doing the things that give you a sense of peace, tranquility, and practical achievements are the areas that you can make progress with as this week goes on. Taurus, your week commencing the 16th of June forecast begins with the energy of that Mars-Uranus square, still very much to the fore. If we go back to the very start of when Uranus joined your sign in mid-May 2018, Mars and Uranus were in a square then. It's a once in 7 year event. So it could be, as you come into this new week, that something quite emotional was very much to the fore, particularly if you felt in some ways closed in terms of your need to be a freer spirit, which Uranus has been pushing you to embrace over that entire period, but particularly full time since March 2019. If there is someone close to you who doesn't like the fact that you're asserting your more authentic self, that may have caused a quarrel, and that energy could still be just vibrating as you come into this new week. Now Jupiter, the planet of optimism, has of course moved into your sector of everyday communication, and those communications are going to be very much to the fore this week, but there is a need for some care, and that's because of course Jupiter has emerged from the exact square with Saturn, but they're still in touch with each other all this week. Saturn and Neptune and also Chiron are all now in your house 12. The 12th house can be to do with the side of our natures that we're not so keen to think about or look at, the shadow side of our situations. So that can be our anxieties, fears, our past, hurts, separations, maybe where we've also experienced betrayals. And I think it is true that you could become more conscious of someone throughout this week who may apparently seem to share a rapport with you, but doesn't in some ways quite seem quite as authentic as you would like. And bear that in mind, because Mars is going to be switching on Tuesday into a much more benevolent zone for you through to the 6th of August. It's going to give you a greater sense of allure and attractiveness. You're going to strut your stuff and feel even more gorgeous. And of course Venus is in your sign, so she's been encouraging you to perhaps, even if you are a dedicated follower of fashion, to just make some small adjustments to your appearance, your clothes and so forth. So the combination between them two is very welcome. Now Mars is actually going to forge a very energized link with Jupiter throughout the rest of this week. So if you are someone who's got a clear idea of what you want to say, and you've got some real passion about a creative plan or idea, you can certainly get it across with conviction and authority, but no little enthusiasm. But if you're not so sure, or there is a seed of doubt within you, or there's someone around you that you're not quite convinced about, that could come up through the quarter moon on Wednesday. And it may, to be honest, be someone you know quite well. Because the moon's in your 11th house of your network, your friendships. But you may become more conscious that that person could be a bit jealous. It may be over your financial situation. They may feel, as you see it, that you're more enriched in some ways in a certain part of your life. Or maybe it's just a downright squabble over money. It could be over a point of principle, to be fair. Just be conscious that Jupiter and Neptune come into an exact peak of a square on Thursday. If ever there was an aspect that would create a sense of unreality, it's that. If you're told something on Thursday that just feels off, just doesn't feel genuine, trust your gut instinct on that. But as we come into the end of the week, of course, there is the summer solstice, ushering in the sun's return to Cancer after 11 months. But also the sun combines with Jupiter, and therefore they both link back to Mars. So if you are someone who wants to really enjoy your love life, you're lucky enough to be with someone that you can chat freely with, you are someone who enjoys sharing your ideas or knowledge online, you can come into some much better form at the end of this week. But just be conscious that that summer solstice does see the sun and also Jupiter clashing still with Saturn and Neptune. So they're really influential, even though the peak of Saturn square with Jupiter was on Sunday last week. So essentially, if you're going through a phase at the moment where your inner confidence is a little bit frail, you're not quite so sure, this is probably a good week as it goes on to spend time with people you're very, very confident of. Those are the people you can relax with, and those are the people you can have some serious fun with. But if there are any fair weather friends around you, Taurus, just keep your guard up a little bit more for the period of this week. Gemini, your week commencing the 16th of June forecast suggests, with the square between Mars and Uranus and Jupiter and Saturn, which brought last week to a close, they're still very active as we go into this new week. Now Mars, since he returned to the sign of Leo on the 18th of April, has been encouraging you to share your ideas with passion and conviction, and why not? And of course the third house is very swift communication, which is very redolent of the energy of your sign. But the sign of Leo can be very prideful. However, Uranus has been a much more complex energy in your chart for far longer. 4 times since March 2019 may have made it difficult to switch off at times. Subconscious energies linked to the electricity of Uranus reached a peak as these two squared on Sunday, and that could have seen you speak in a very emotional way, because that's the 12th house, but particularly towards a situation where you feel someone is not being upfront with you, perhaps not as loyal as they could be, and you may really enter this week feeling quite almost angered if you feel there has been some kind of betrayal. But equally, Jupiter is now in the part of your situation to do with the potential to improve your finances over the next year, or your sense of self-worth, or to really firm up the foundations of your life. But that's clashing with Saturn and Neptune in a part of your chart to do with your long-term plan or idealism. And there could be a link between these two synodic clashes. So if something isn't quite shaping up at the speed you want, or it feels that you're being blocked or prevented by a group of people or by conditions as they are at the present time, I don't feel that this week is necessarily going to provide the answers that you may want in totality, because Mars moves on Tuesday into your 4th house through to the 6th of August. But Mars in the 4th house can be quite prickly and quite emotional and quite up and down. It's going to be important not to be defensive. But the interesting thing is Mars forges a very positive link to Jupiter throughout the rest of this week. So if you are someone who's wanting to do something around your home, perhaps make some improvements, get some contractors in, catch up on the do-it-yourself jobs that you've been putting off, Virgo, is very much about virtue, so the thrust of Mars can be helpful. Or it's also possible that for some Geminis, you may be thinking of working from home, or in some ways selling or re-renting somewhere else that fits your purpose more exactly. But it's just that at the heart of this week there is a quarter moon, and it sees the moon in the sign of Pisces, which makes it difficult for you to disguise how you really feel, clashing with the sun in its last moments in your sign. And whether it is about a plan that's important to you as an individual, or needing to deal with people at work that you don't quite get, something may feel out of kilter. Also, Jupiter and Neptune come into an exact square on Thursday. Just be conscious that if you are discussing a financial matter, it's really important to stay very grounded and realistic in what your expectations are. That said, on Saturday the Sun returns to Cancer. We have the summer solstice in the north, and obviously the winter in the south. But Western tropical astrology sees this as the beginning of cardinal quadrant 2, a backdrop of energy which lasts through to the autumnal equinox. So this next quadrant is very much to do with nurture, the sign of Cancer, but the Sun combines with Jupiter. Ordinarily one of the most fortunate aspects you can get in astrology, particularly with Jupiter exalted, so blessed. It glows up in the sign of Cancer. So you could have some kind of financial breakthrough at the end of this week, but it may also be necessary to be quite persistent in terms of a plan that may require you to apply yourself for longer than just this exact moment. So if Saturn and Neptune weren't squaring up to this summer solstice, I feel the chances of you having some outright good fortune would be very strong, and it is still possible. But if you are someone who enjoys getting together with others, perhaps in some kind of informal syndicate, that might not be an area that is where you will get your type of fortune. It may be more to do with converting the ideas that you've been working hard on over the last month, or perhaps much longer back, converting those into something more tangible. And self-belief, very Jupiterian, is going to be very important to the process. So even if you do encounter some frustration at the start of this week, or someone you don't feel is very upfront or very loyal, and that's very irritating, try to keep the faith, focus on what's important to you, keep going through the processes in a very methodical way. Saturn and Neptune may resist some of your ideas at the moment, but if you put enough energy into trying to firm up what you've been working on in a very dynamic way for some time, you could have a significant breakthrough. So Cancer, your week commencing the 16th of June forecast, the biggest news story for you personally is the arrival back in your sign of the Sun on Saturday and the summer solstice. The Sun's also going to align with Jupiter. Ordinarily this event would be stunning. It can only happen once every 12, sometimes 13 years, because that's Jupiter's cycle. But this year they are both inhibited by the potentially strict but also confusing energies of Neptune. Also, as you come into this week, there may be some turbulence that you do need to address around an issue that's to do with your long-term future, but where your values are not aligning perhaps with how you're earning a living, or perhaps even the foundations of your life just feel quite rocky at the present time. In fact, over the last month, you may have gone through quite a lot of deep soul searching, and that's going to be amplified with the quarter moon, which occurs at the heart of this week. But one thing I'd like to assure you is Mars, the planet of assertion, actually moves at the heart of this week into a much more physically active part of your situation. He also forges a stunning alliance with the Sun and Jupiter as the week goes on. And if you can focus on the things you feel very connected to, that you feel a real sense of motivation and even passion around, you're going to start to emerge from this rather uncomfortable phase. It doesn't mean to say it's going to be perfect, particularly if you are in a situation professionally where you're needing or currently work with people that you find a little bit stuck, oppressive, rather stiff, when you're wanting to be much more individualistic and dynamic. But if you ever have thought of starting your own enterprise or taking a hobby and converting it into something more at the heart of your life, by the end of this week and over the following 13 months of the cardinal quadrant period that comes in with the summer solstice, you have a great opportunity with Mars in the mix to drive things forwards and overcome any initial obstacles or rather doubtful attitudes that you encounter from anyone around you. So Leo, as you enter week commencing the 16th of June, there may have been some choppy turbulence that you encountered as last week came to a close. And that energy may be still reverberating through your situation. It could have been a clash of wills in a close personal relationship. Perhaps you wanted to assert yourself more recently, and perhaps also push back against some people's expectations of how you'll react and conform to certain situations. Even you may have been surprised by just how rebellious you may have felt. But of course, Jupiter has also moved into a very spiritual part of your situation, and that's teasing through its square with Neptune this week, which peaks on Thursday, and also with the energy from Saturn, for you to become much more conscious of what your higher truth is about. But Mars has been in your sign in 2 phases in a total of 17 weeks, and on Tuesday that comes to an end. And it's all because of the once every 2.5 year Mars retrograde cycle. Now Mars, since the 18th of April in its second phase, has been really pushing you to invest in your dynamism and to believe with utter self-confidence whatever you're trying to achieve. But whether that's actually meshed in with the day job, or perhaps the people you need to in some ways collaborate or cooperate with who can influence your future, such as people like banks, that is a different matter. But I feel that what Mars has given you an opportunity to do over the entirety of its journey through your sign is to focus on how you can be much more creative and demonstrate your flair with a greater degree of confidence. And what's going to happen from Tuesday through to the 6th of August, you're going to see just how much progress you've made in converting that passion and those ideas into something more tangible. Now, there could be something a little bit disappointing around a friendship at the heart of the week with the quarter moon, especially if there's a friend that you're drawn to, and perhaps in a romantic context, but maybe they don't want that. Or is there a friend around you who tends to be a little bit too clingy? Either of those options are possible. But then the Sun joins up with Jupiter on Saturday with the summer solstice, and that triggers your annual period of personal review, which goes on for the next 4 weeks. It's a great opportunity to just take a little bit of a breath. Yes, you do like to be at the heart of things. Yes, you can be someone who's organising and leading people, but everyone sometimes just needs a little bit of space to just let everything digest through them. And this is your opportunity to decompress from what has been a very, very intense period of time. But it's also important to know that as the Sun reaches the summer solstice, he does also align with Jupiter. And there's a lot of opportunity for you to look at life, yourself, and even embrace the concepts of healing in a very dynamic way. If you are someone who does enjoy getting away for a spa day or having some therapeutic treatments, enjoy those, indulge yourself over the following month. Virgo, your week commencing the 16th of June forecast may begin in a bit of a bumpy way. Something you don't really want to look at, or someone else doesn't want to look at, that you're keen to discuss, could be part of the story as the week begins. There's part of you at the present time that is a truth seeker, but another part of you that could feel conflicted if it's a tender subject that you may prefer to avoid, and that creates some tension. Yet on Tuesday, Mars bustles into your sign through to the 6th of August, and this is something that's really going to be phenomenally helpful for you, because from the middle of April, but also from the 6th of November through to the 6th of January, Mars has been making his way through the most tender and complex part of your chart, and at times it may have seen some very sensitive issues from your past come bubbling up into the surface. You may have felt quite angry at times, at other times quite tearful. Mars moving into your sign is going to give you a much greater sense of being in the present. That psychological energy will ease away. You're also going to feel much more energized, which will be really welcome. But also, Mars is going to be linking fantastically well this week to Jupiter, the planet of hope. Now, Jupiter and Saturn are in that square at the start of the week, and Saturn and Neptune in the part of your chart that's to do with the deep dive of life, the more psychological dimension, they are still very much to the fore. But I feel Mars linking with Jupiter is a very high energy link, particularly around people you enjoy connecting with. So the networks that you have may have been tested. You may have become much more conscious of who you couldn't really truly rely upon, and in fact there may have been some epic fails around certain friendships or even a relationship. But Mars moving into your sign, the Sun arriving to join Jupiter on Saturday with the summer solstice, is putting the focus very much more on your future, but also your higher purpose. But you're going to find it much easier to collaborate, to cooperate, to network, and really feel much more driven to take the next step forward. So you're coming out of a period that has at times been somewhat challenging, and it's an opportunity for you to really go forwards in a much more dynamic and exciting way. So Libra, your week commencing the 16th of June forecast sees the Sun move at the end of the week right to the top of your chart. He aligns with Jupiter. Jupiter is very much about growth, aspiration, and can be about good fortune. When it comes to your career, goals or ambitions, the following 3 months can be a critical time for you. But immediately this week, you also need to be aware that whatever desires you have, you're not going to get there without working closely with others. So those relationships, those alliances and collaborations will be just as important as your unique personal skills. Not least because, of course, Saturn and Neptune in your opposite sign continue to be quite restrictive even when the Sun returns to Cancer with the summer solstice, to the Sun and Jupiter too. So working with people will be as important as what you do yourself. Also Mars, the planet, which has been moving across 2 zodiac signs since the time of your birthday last year, initially priming up your ambitions, then working into an area very much to do with collaboration, and then it went through its retrograde, which slowed everything down. More recently, since the 18th of April, you may have had an opportunity to actually refresh some connections and actually make quite a bit of progress around some key hopes. Higher hopes, very much about the 11th house. But this week on Tuesday, Mars dives deep, moves into a more psychological area. You may find yourself making contact or hearing from someone from your past. This could be a business connection. It could be someone who had an authority about them. But also Mars moving into the 12th house can have a tendency to see our moods a little bit up and down. It's a very psychological area, and if there are any latent angers laying dormant deep within you, Mars can trigger them. So at one minute we can feel quite fired up. The next we can feel quite emotional. So because that's very much an energy that is out of sight, and also because of the need of Saturn and Neptune to work mindfully with others, even though the Sun and Jupiter are pushing you to seize the limelight, you do need to be a little bit aware of the overall celestial landscape. So as much as you can take some giant step forward, I think through to the 6th of August, you just need to approach things in a very steady and persistent way. Then Mars will move into your sign, and in fact across the 8th to the 11th of August forges 2 absolutely glittering alliances, and that can be a time of an incredibly positive breakthrough. Scorpio, your week commencing the 16th of June forecast could see you needing to catch your breath as you enter this new week. There may have been some kind of contretemps over the weekend. Perhaps you've been pushing a little bit harder back on someone that you feel has a tendency to be a little bit too sure of what you should do for you. And good for you if so. So there may have been a tussle in a romantic tie, maybe a family dynamic, could be even at work, where it feels that someone is not really quite recognising and respecting what you provide. But equally, if you've been a little bit over assertive, someone may have pushed back on you. But as we come into this new week, by Tuesday, your traditional ruler moves into a new home. And in the 11th house and in the practical Virgo, you could become minded through to the 6th of August to work on things that have some kind of benefit to you, but also perhaps on things that can benefit others too. And even around your friendships, there can be something to celebrate about the things we have in common. But if you do connect to people through a group, a team, a joint interest, that's an area that can really thrive. But later in the week, the Sun returns to the sign of Cancer. We have the summer solstice in the northern hemisphere and the winter in the south. But in terms of Western tropical astrology, it's a big moment. It's the moment for your sign when you can think about being a bit more spontaneous after all the intensity that has played out recently. But the Sun is going to link with Jupiter, and Jupiter in the 9th house, as it is for you, can be about travel. Don't be surprised if over the next month you do want to break free, have some more spontaneous days out, perhaps go on a holiday vacation. It really can be very rejuvenating for you. It's just that as the Sun arrives back in Cancer and merges with Jupiter, they're both still, or in the case of Jupiter, still in an angle with Saturn and Neptune. So you may need to be mindful of your obligations and responsibilities. You might not be able to drop everything and just go. There may be some organisation that needs to be done, but you can do it. But do give yourself permission to be a bit freer from the start of this week onwards and really break out of any rather more structured existence which may have proved to be somewhat oppressive more recently. Sagittarius, your week commencing the 16th of June forecast sees a once in a year aspect involving your ruler with the Sun. It's the conjunction. It occurs towards the end of the week as the Sun moves into the sign of Cancer. Ordinarily, this can be very fortunate. It's not to say it can't be fortunate this year. It occurs for you in house 8, very much about where we're most invested, devoted, in a spiritual, psychological, even intimate way, but it can also be about long-term finances. Because Saturn and Neptune are squaring up to Jupiter and the Sun, it does put a little bit of a brake on the potential for neat good fortune. But if you are someone who's very entrepreneurial and you have got a good idea and it has been worked through carefully, the fact that Mars, the planet of passion and desire, moves right to the top of your chart on Tuesday and links so positively with the Sun and Jupiter gives you an opportunity to really push forwards with a great deal of conviction and self-confidence if your plan is clear. What's not going to be so good is if you hear about something or you watch a video and it's about how you may make some money quickly. Those kind of get rich quick schemes is something you need to be more cautious of. And of course, as we come into this week, it is off the back of a lot of tension, particularly with Mars in the square with Uranus. And if you have been feeling a bit overburdened, one of the things I feel that Mars moving to the top of your chart can do is help you to really decide on your priorities and narrow your focus, but then put more singular effort into the thing that really is exciting you. Because essentially where the Sun and Jupiter meet is very much about where we want to be all in. It's not about half measures, it's where we're totally committed. And if there is someone, for example, that you're really drawn towards, this could be a time that the relationship gets much more intriguing. But it may still not go quite as quick as you would like because of the restraining energies of Saturn. So patience will still be important. Capricorn, your week commencing the 16th of June forecast sees the Sun join Jupiter in your sector of relating. That occurs Saturday towards the end of the week. They merge together in a potentially very fortunate way, which provides a backdrop not just for the time the Sun's in Cancer, but through the next 3 months of Cardinal Quadrant 2. But of course, Saturn, your ruler, is angling to them as well. So relationships are taking on a much more important vibration in your situation. Yes, you need the connection, but it needs to be heartfelt. It needs to work emotionally for you. Also, earlier in the week, Mars, the planet of passion, which clashed so bitterly with Uranus as last week came to a close, that moves for you into a part of your chart that's very much to do with liberty and freedom. So if you have been incurring quite heavy weather around a relationship that hasn't been working so well, I feel Mars moving into Virgo through to August the 6th could make you much more mindful of perhaps seizing back your personal independence. But that's not a given. There's also a quarter moon at the heart of this week in the sign of Pisces, which for you is the 3rd house. So the energy of the Sun for you is the 6th house, can be to do with being perhaps a little bit more virtuous, catching up on chores and so forth. But I feel that that relationship strand is really what's going to dominate most this week. By the end of the week, if you really want to stand up your boundaries, that's going to be something you can do. If you'd like to set your intentions to bring someone into your world who can be really meaningful, go for it. However, if you are unsure, Mars is going to be very influential because it links with both the Sun and Jupiter, and that's going to give you more confidence to say exactly how you feel, even if you don't want to leave a relationship. If you feel that someone just goes through the same patterns of not really hearing or seeing how you feel or respecting what you're saying, you can be much more assertive towards the end of this week in speaking your personal truth. So Aquarius, your week commencing the 16th of June forecast could have seen you end last week feeling a little bit drained, to be honest. A lot of electric energy with Saturn, your traditional ruler, squaring off to Jupiter in the part of your chart to do with virtue. That may have just limited your physical vitality. And then the tension and electricity of your modern ruler, Uranus in the square with Mars, maybe around a close relationship, a family tie, just a need for space or to assert yourself, just put everything a little bit on edge. But as we come into this new week, Mars is actually going to be moving into a new home. If you're a natural entrepreneur, or you are someone who's been getting an itch to take more control of your longer term finances, through to the 6th of August, Mars here gives you a wonderful opportunity to really get to grips with whatever talents you've got. But also the Sun is going to be joining with Jupiter as the week draws to a close in Cancer with the solstice, providing a backdrop energy for initially the first 4 weeks, but also 13, which is very much to do with nurture, but nurture around discipline and attending to some details in a way which makes a lot of difference bit by bit. So if you apply yourself, particularly with the Sun joining up with Jupiter, you could see an improvement in your physical vitality, your welfare, your fitness, generally over the next weeks. But that Mars moving into Virgo is interesting because that, of course, is very much to do with attention to detail. But Mars in the 8th house is more redolent of its rulership of Scorpio. It's more about desire. It's possible in a romantic situation, if you have been getting to know someone with Mars going through the sign of Leo and the Sun in your 5th house of sociability, that things could get quite raunchy if it feels right. But equally, in an ongoing situation, or just your overall life structure, you may want to just get things working more efficiently. But don't rush the process. The quarter moon at the heart of this week could see you almost try a little bit too hard. If you are going to give yourself a list of things to achieve this week, don't make that list too long, because with Jupiter and Neptune coming into their exact square on Thursday, I still think that energy is going to be at a premium, but also you could find yourself soaking up energy around you in a very tender way. So just be aware of that energetic exchange. If you encounter people that you just find a little bit wearing, it could exhaust you more quickly. But as the week draws to a close, although the Sun's combination with Jupiter can be fortunate, so if you are applying for a job, that could be part of a good news story developing, your attention to detail and how you write or explain things is going to be very important too, with Saturn and Neptune in a square with those two players too. So Pisces, your week commencing the 16th of June forecast begins with the Sun entering its last week of 4 through the sign of Gemini, which of course is about bright sparkling communication, but for you it's also the part of your chart to do with your environment, your inner world, your feelings, sensitivity, nurture, security, shelter, family and home. But as you end this week, the Sun moves into your sister water sign of Cancer, where it merges with your traditional ruler of Jupiter. Now that's one of astrology's best influences annually. But this year they are conflicted by Saturn and also your modern ruler of Neptune. In fact, Jupiter and Neptune reach a square on Thursday. So it is going to be important, particularly if you're wanting to step up your social interaction or perhaps spend some money on something you're really drawn to just know that Jupiter and Neptune in a square can make something seem quite irresistible. But the even bigger picture is that Mars moving on Tuesday into your sector of relating is a great opportunity through to the 6th of August to really assert your boundaries. So if you have been feeling, and with the Mars-Uranus square and the Jupiter-Saturn square, if you have been feeling that a relationship of any kind hasn't been working quite as you'd like, Mars moving into Virgo can help you to be a bit stronger about what you will or will not accept. But just know that Sun and Jupiter may not have the best of connections this year because of the role of Saturn and Neptune, but they are still together. And for you, this is the part of your chart that you're entering as the week closes. It's very much more to do with joyfulness, playfulness, interacting with people, just letting go a little bit more. Because the Sun's journey through Gemini also coincided with Jupiter leaving that sign. And of course Jupiter should, on the face of it, have given you some support over the last year, and he may have done, but it was conditional because of Saturn being in your sign. So Saturn moving through your sign the last couple of years has probably been quite depleting at times. So moving into Aries, it's asking you to be mindful of your resources and also your values and the foundation of your world. So you don't really want to be too too free and easy with your resources as the Sun joins up with Jupiter in your 5th house, but I feel that you will see a shift that's more outgoing, more exuberant, and it's just about pacing yourself really. But if you are wanting to bring extra sparkle into your social life, or bring some romantic possibilities in your direction, Mars will see you a lot more proactive over the next 6 weeks. Please join me at my new website at patrickarundell.com. It has been going for 24 years in total. We've given it a refresh. You can enjoy your free daily, weekly, monthly, yearly, general, love and Vedic horoscopes, but also my sensational 3 3-card tarot. That's patrickarundell.com.